Hello students, I'm Iqbal Singh and I teach Political Science and International Relations optional paper at Vajiram and Ravi. In this particular video students, we're going to have a discussion on a topic which is related to PSIR Paper-II, which is the topic of defensive neorealism and offensive neorealism. I'm sure students you must have seen the syllabus of PSIR Paper-II, and I'd like to tell you that one of the most important topics in PSIR Paper-II is approaches to study international relations, which is also understood as theories to study international relations, and multiple theories are mentioned in the syllabus. Realism, of course, is one of them. And idealism is also there, which is also understood as the liberal approach. Marxist approach is also in the syllabus. Systems approach is also mentioned, and theory of functionalism is also there. So there's multiple theories are there. And I always tell my students that it's very important to have very good understanding and complete conceptual clarity over this particular chapter of theories of IR in order to score good marks in PSIR Paper-II. Therefore, it is one of the most important chapters of PSIR Paper-II, and we have today picked up one topic from this particular chapter to discuss in this video, which I've already mentioned to you. The topic is the defensive neorealism and offensive neorealism. I will help you understand what are the differences between these two. What is the difference between these two ideas of defensive neorealism and offensive neorealism? However, before I start discussing that, I'd like to tell you something about the theory of realism. I hope you are already aware, and I'm sure if PSIR students are watching the video, they must be very well aware that the theory of realism is one of the most influential theories to study international politics. In fact, it has a hegemonic position among IR theories, and it is also called as a meta-narrative. In fact, the theory of realism, it is further divided into sub-traditions. For example, there is classical realism, which was given by Hans J. Morgenthau in 1948 in his book Politics Among Nations. Then subsequently in the year 1979, we also saw emergence of neorealism given by Kenneth Waltz in his book Theory of International Politics. And then we also saw emergence of neoclassical realism given by scholars like Walworth, Randall Schweller, and also Fareed Zakaria. And then we've also seen emergence of subaltern realism, which is more of a post-colonial narrative of realism given by scholars like Muhammad Ayub. So realism itself has multiple schools of thought, and out of all these sub-traditions in realism, today we have picked up neorealism, and we're going to discuss these two ideas related to neorealism. In fact, in neorealism itself, I'd like to tell you that there are two different streams of thought. There's one stream of thought which is represented by the views of Kenneth Waltz and which is described as defensive neorealism. And then another stream of thought which is represented by the views of John Mearsheimer, and that is described as offensive neorealism. And we will have a discussion on both these ideas today. And before I discuss differences between these two ideas, we must have a discussion on similarities. In fact, students, I'd like to tell you that there are certain core ideas associated with neorealism on which both the offensive and the defensive realists agree with each other. Which are those core ideas? Let's have a discussion on that. Similarities. First of all, I'd like to tell you that neorealism has given a state-centric explanation of international politics. According to neorealism, the most important actor in international politics is the state actor. And they do not give importance to non-state actors like multinational corporations, NGOs, or transnational terrorist networks. In fact, a lot of realists would argue that non-state actors are acting as proxies of state actors, and therefore state actors are the most important, and that is why we say that neorealism has given a state-centric explanation of international politics. Secondly, and very importantly, neorealism argues that we do see an international system of states existing in the world. And neorealism strongly recommends that we must try and understand the structure of international system of states in order to understand power-seeking behavior of the state. In fact, this is one of the most important arguments of neorealism, the core idea that we should try to understand the structure of international politics. We should try to examine the structure of international politics in order to understand the power-seeking behavior of the state. That is the reason why neorealism is also known as structural realism or systemic realism, because neorealism gives a lot of importance to the structure of international politics and also the international system. In fact, I'd like to tell you that neorealist scholars like Kenneth Waltz, they do agree with the timeless wisdom of classical realism that international politics is all about power struggle among the states of the world. However, they reject the human nature explanation given by classical realism. Classical realism has been able to build their theory on the basis of their understanding of human nature, which is not acceptable to neorealism. In fact, neorealism has made a sincere attempt to make realism more scientific. That is why neorealism is also known as scientific realism. And the most important argument of neorealism is, the most important contribution is that we must try and understand the structure of international politics to understand state behavior. And according to the neorealist, the most important feature of the structure of international politics, of course, is anarchy. They gave a lot of importance to the anarchic nature of international politics. According to neorealism, anarchy is the most important feature of the structure of international politics. What is anarchy? Complete absence of authority in international politics. In international politics, there is no higher authority, no overarching authority governing the states of the world or regulating the states of the world. All states are sovereign. There is no international government, no international authority existing which can govern or regulate the behavior of the states. All states are sovereign. This absence of authority in international politics is known as anarchy. And this is the most important feature of international politics. And this is where international politics is different from domestic politics. Because in domestic politics, we do see presence of authority. In domestic politics, we do see that there's a hierarchical structure of authority existing. And because of that authority, we see that there's rule of law in domestic politics. We see that there's law and order. The authority is responsible to maintain the law and order, which in turn ensures stability in the society, because of which individuals are able to ensure their security and survival. But this is not true in case of international politics. In international politics, there is no authority. There is complete absence of authority. There is no international government, no international prime minister or president, nothing like that. No authority is existing. And all states are sovereign. So state behavior is not regulated by any higher or overarching authority in international politics, which is described as anarchy by neorealism. And neorealism says that this is the most important feature. If we study anarchy and we study implications of anarchy, then this will help us understand why states try and acquire power, why there is power struggle going on in international politics. That can be understood with the help of understanding the implications of anarchy, the nature of the structure of international politics. So let's try and understand which are those implications of anarchy. According to neorealism, anarchy will result in these three consequences. Which are these three? First is self-help world. Because of anarchy, states will realize, state actors will realize that they are operating in a self-help world. There is nobody to help them. They will have to ensure their security on their own. Because of which there will be a feeling of fear and insecurity among the state actors. That is the reason why the most important objective of states is to ensure national security, is to protect national security. That becomes the most important national interest. And the best way to ensure that is, best way to ensure national security is by seeking power. And that is the reason why all states would want to seek power. So this is the first implication, that because of anarchy, states, they feel insecure, that they are operating in a self-help world. There's nobody to help them. And there's no guarantee for the national security. And the only answer to this problem is by seeking power. And in fact, neorealists, they give a lot of importance to military power. There can be many different forms of power, but neorealists give a lot of importance to military power. The second implication is the idea of security dilemma. Because of anarchy, the states will not be able to trust each other. There will be a situation of uncertainty. There will be a lot of suspicion. There will be a lot of trust deficit. And that is the reason why the states, they are going to suffer from security dilemma. What is security dilemma? This idea has been best explained by two scholars, Ken Booth and Nicholas Wheeler. According to Ken Booth and Nicholas Wheeler, actions taken by a state to improve their national security is understood as aggression by other states. That is a dilemma. I'll again like to repeat for you that according to Nicholas Wheeler and Ken Booth, in international politics, because of anarchy, what will happen? Actions taken by a particular state to improve their national security is understood as or is interpreted as aggression by other state actors. They say that there are two dilemmas existing. There are two types of dilemma. First is dilemma of interpretation. What is dilemma of interpretation? The other state actors will never be able to determine with certainty that what is the intention or what is the motive behind acquiring military power. If a particular country or a particular state is trying to acquire military power, what is the intention behind it? What is the motivation? And they'll never be able to get this answer. They'll never be able to answer this with certainty. Is it being done for national security? Is the state developing military power to strengthen its national security, or this is being done to dominate the others? This is the dilemma of interpretation. The second dilemma is dilemma of response. That how should other state actors respond? Should they respond in kind by also developing similar form of military power or military capability, or they should try and diffuse the tension? So these two dilemmas do exist. Dilemma of interpretation and dilemma of response, which is described as security dilemma by Ken Booth and Nicholas Wheeler. So basically, because of anarchy, states will also suffer from security dilemma, which is going to cause a lot of uncertainty and trust deficit among the states in international politics. And the third implication of anarchy is the concept of relative gains. It is argued that states will be driven by relative gains instead of absolute gains, which means that states would be primarily concerned with maintaining their position or improving their position in relation to other states, which would result in a zero-sum approach. What do we understand by zero-sum approach? That if as a state, if I'm able to increase my power, if I'm able to become more powerful, then I would want that the power which I'm gaining, this should happen at the cost of the other. That means my gain should be exactly equal to the loss of the other. This is the zero-sum approach. Because states would want to improve their position in relation to others. And this happens why? Because states are not able to trust each other. They suffer from security dilemma, which is also an implication of anarchy. This is the reason why neorealists, they believe that it would be very difficult for international organizations and international institutions to ensure cooperation between the states. And international organizations would not be very effective. Because in order to ensure cooperation, states must believe in absolute gains. What is cooperation? States having negotiations, states having peaceful dialogue, states signing international agreements and treaties. Why would they sign an agreement? They would sign an agreement if they believe that they are all supposed to benefit from it. That is the concept of absolute gain. But that's not going to happen because states are driven by relative gains. They follow a zero-sum approach. That is the reason why, according to neorealism, international organizations and institutions would not be effective. They will not be able to encourage or ensure cooperation between states. Therefore, these implications of anarchy are able to help us understand the conflictual nature of international politics. So these are the three implications of anarchy. So neorealism has identified these structural forces, these structural factors which would compel the state to seek power. So these are systemic constraints, structural forces which would compel the state to seek power, and that is why we see there is a power struggle going on in international politics. Power-seeking behavior of the state can be understood, can be explained with the help of these three implications of anarchy, which is the self-help world, security dilemma, and the zero-sum approach, which they follow because of the concept of relative gains. So neorealism's biggest contribution is that if we are able to understand the structure of international politics, which is anarchic in nature, and if we're able to understand the implications of anarchy, this will give us a much needed insight in understanding state behavior, especially the power-seeking behavior of the state. So these are the core ideas of neorealism on which both the offensive and the defensive realists, they agree with each other. Both would believe that yes, because of anarchy, we have struggled for power. Both would agree that because of anarchy, we see more of conflict in international politics as compared to cooperation. So now that we have discussed the similarities, now let's have a discussion on differences between both these ideas, offensive realism and defensive realism. So there are basically two themes, two very important questions on which both the offensive and defensive realists, they disagree with each other. The first question is that what is the impact of anarchy on state behavior? How is it going to affect state behavior? Because of anarchy, is the state going to give importance to security and survival? Or because of anarchy, state is going to give importance to domination? That is the first question on which they differ. Second is that if the state follows policy of expansionism, policy of aggression, policy of conquest, will it be beneficial for the state? If a particular state follows aggressive foreign policy, expansionist foreign policy, policy of conquest, then is it going to benefit the state or not? These are the two important questions, two important themes on which offensive and defensive realists, they disagree. Now, let's discuss first defensive neorealism. Defensive neorealism has been given by Kenneth Waltz. In fact, I'd like to tell you that Kenneth Waltz is responsible for giving the theory of neorealism in his book, Theory of International Politics, written in 1979. And his views on neorealism is described as defensive neorealism. According to Kenneth Waltz, uncertainty caused by anarchy is going to make states security maximizers. Kenneth Waltz strongly believes that states are going to give importance to their security, their survival. He accepts that yes, because of anarchy, because of the uncertainty of anarchy, states would want to pursue power, they would want to acquire power because there is a self-help world, there is security dilemma, states are driven by relative gains, so states would want to have power. But power would be means to achieve the end goal, and the end goal is going to be security, survival. So according to defensive neorealism, states are going to give more importance to security and survival. States would act as security maximizers. Now we must also discuss what would be the impact on a state if a state follows aggressive foreign policy. Will it benefit the state? The defensive neorealists, they propose that no, it would not benefit. According to defensive neorealism, if a particular country follows aggressive foreign policy or a policy of expansionism or a policy of conquest, then this would be self-defeating in nature. Why self-defeating? Because Kenneth Waltz argues that one of the most inherent features of international politics is balance of power. And all states would have a desire to maintain or sustain the existing balance of power. Now, if there's a country which wants to pursue extraordinary power, unlimited power, wants to dominate others, then what would happen in that particular case? Other states in the international system will feel insecure. They would want to restore the balance of power and they would be compelled to form coalitions and alliances against this aggressive state. Therefore, in the final analysis, there will be no change in relative power. Therefore, Kenneth Waltz doesn't recommend a policy of power maximization. He recommends a policy of security maximization. I would also like to quote Jack Snyder in this context. Jack Snyder also is a defensive neorealist and subscribes to the ideas of defensive neorealism. He also believes that international anarchy is going to punish aggression. International anarchy is not going to reward aggression. He believes that benefits of the policy of conquest would rarely outweigh the negatives. He also therefore understands that aggressive foreign policies can be counterproductive. So instead of seeking domination, instead of trying and developing extraordinary and unlimited power, the states should try and maximize their security. So this is the idea of defensive neorealist scholars, or the viewpoints of the defensive neorealist scholars like Kenneth Waltz and Jack Snyder. Now that we've understood defensive neorealism, now let's move on and try and understand what is the viewpoint of offensive neorealism on the same questions. Offensive neorealism has been given by John Mearsheimer. In fact, I'd like to tell you that Mearsheimer wrote a book in the year 2001, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, which is one of the most famous books in international relations. In this particular book, he gave his views on neorealism and his views on rivalry between the established hegemon USA and the rising power China. And Mearsheimer believes that because of anarchy, because of the uncertainty caused by anarchy, states would be compelled to become power maximizers. And this is the biggest point of difference between defensive realists and offensive realists. Defensive realists, like we discussed already, they believe that states are going to give more priority to security and survival, and therefore they are going to be security maximizers. But the offensive realists like Mearsheimer, they believe that no, states would want to seek more and more power. Power is the means, power is the end. States will want to seek more and more power, and states would become power maximizers. In fact, according to Mearsheimer, a state's security cannot be ensured. No state would be secure until and unless there is a huge gap between its power and the power of other states. That is the reason why Mearsheimer proposes and strongly recommends that if a particular state wants to ensure its security, the best way to ensure security is by acquiring hegemony, by being the most dominant state in your region. Domination, hegemony should be the objective of states as per John Mearsheimer. He believes that states are power maximizers, and in order to ensure their national security, they must seek domination, hegemony. Hegemony in their own region, and then preferably, if they can, even at the global level. Hegemony is guarantee to security. Hegemony will ensure security. As I told you, that no state can be secured until and unless there is a huge gap in its power and the power of the others. This is the main argument of offensive realism. And offensive realism does support the idea of hegemony. According to offensive realism, states should try and pursue hegemony, dominance, as a guarantee to their security. This is how offensive realists are different from and disagree with the defensive realists, because defensive realists are talking about that states should prioritize security. States are security maximizers. And in fact, defensive realists like Jack Snyder, they say international anarchy will punish aggression, and aggressive foreign policies or the desire to develop extraordinary power would be self-defeating. But Mearsheimer says, no, states are power maximizers. And that's the only way to ensure your security. You will have to acquire more and more power, seek more and more power. And states will try and become hegemons. They would try and seek domination, which is a guarantee for their security. This is the main idea of offensive neorealism. Now we must also have discussion on Mearsheimer's views on the rivalry between the established hegemon USA and the rising power China. Mearsheimer is of the viewpoint that China is trying to pursue more and more power. China is trying to acquire more and more power, and this is being done not for a defensive purpose but for an offensive purpose. Because Mearsheimer firmly believes that states are power maximizers, and he cautions American foreign policy makers that they should not misunderstand China's intentions. China is not doing this for a defensive purpose but for an offensive purpose. Even though China claims that it is going to be a peaceful rise, he says peaceful rise of China is not possible. He says China also is a would-be hegemon. They would want to become the hegemon. It is widely believed that China is the biggest challenger to American hegemony. Mearsheimer says China is not just a challenger. China would want to displace US hegemony. China would want to displace US hegemony and would want to become the hegemon of the world, because hegemony is your final guarantee to security. And that is why he recommends that America, USA, must try and balance the rise of China. USA should not be complacent. They should not live in their own fantasy world, imagining that there would be a peaceful rise of China and subsequently China would also become more democratic. Therefore, we should have more and more free trade with China. He rejects all this. He says America should understand that China is going to not just challenge, but China would want to displace US hegemony in the future. Therefore, USA should actively pursue a policy to counterbalance the rise of China. It is so interesting to note that this is exactly what has happened. In the year 2001, he wrote this book, Tragedy of the Great Power Politics. Today, we are in 2023. 23 years have passed, and whatever Mearsheimer had predicted in 2001 is exactly what has happened. China has become very powerful. China has now become the second largest economy of the world. And now it is more and more visible that Chinese intentions are offensive and aggressive. Peaceful rise of China is not going to happen. China is following policy of expansionism, policy of aggression. In fact, it is now widely believed that China would want to displace US hegemony. China would want to become the next global hegemon. And China is doing this by pursuing initiatives like Belt and Road Initiative, which is giving China more and more influence and control in the Indo-Pacific. China is also a very active participant in BRICS. BRICS countries, they're trying to challenge the economic hegemony of USA. We also see a lot of debate and discussion about ideas like de-dollarization now, where China would want that US dollar should not remain the currency anchor of the world anymore. China has also come up with institutions like AIIB, Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, and BRICS have also come up with institutions like NDB, New Development Bank, which are being seen as alternatives to American-dominated institutions like IMF and World Bank. So we see that there's a very apparent and a visible policy on the behalf of China, where they are now trying to not just challenge, but displace US hegemony. And this is what Mearsheimer had predicted, that China's desire to acquire power is being done with an offensive purpose, not with a defensive purpose, because all states are power maximizers and states would want to become hegemons. They would want to dominate others because hegemony is your final guarantee to security. And we are already seeing that USA has a very visible policy now to counter the rise of China. In fact, recently USA released their national security strategy, in which USA claims that their biggest rival is China. They don't even say it is Russia. Russia obviously is seen as a threat, but their biggest rival, they say, is China, and they would want to counter China. And we see a very visible counterbalance strategy being implemented. In the Indo-Pacific specifically, we see an emergence of a Quad group. We see emergence of IPF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is also led by USA. And these initiatives are being seen as American initiatives to counter the rise and increasing influence of China in the Indo-Pacific. We've also seen that America and the G7 countries, they have come up with initiatives like Blue Dot Network, Build Back Better World Partnership, PGI, Partnership of Global Infrastructure and Investment, in order to counter the hegemonic project of China, which is Belt and Road Initiative. So whatever Mearsheimer had predicted back then in 2001 in his book, all of that has come to be true, which does reflect the wisdom of Mearsheimer in understanding international politics. We do see that there is a great amount of geopolitical tussle now going on between USA and China. China would want to displace US hegemony. USA wants to sustain its hegemony. Therefore, USA is following a policy, a very apparent and active policy to counter the rise of China, which has led to US-China rivalry. And now we are also seeing debate and discussion regarding the emergence of new Cold War. And Mearsheimer has recently written an article on this, on emergence of new Cold War, where he says that yes, I do see emergence of new Cold War. Two poles of power are again emerging, one pole led by US, other pole led by China, and Russia also is having a great deal of friendship now with China. In fact, Russia and China have recently said that they have unlimited friendship. They've used the term limitless friendship. And Mearsheimer says USA should be blamed for this. Mearsheimer, in his article written recently, he gives a very interesting viewpoint. He says USA should be blamed for this because USA kept on following the policy of engagement with China for the last 20 years hoping that once China becomes part of the liberal world order, China would also transform and become more democratic. And kept on following policy of engagement with China. USA encouraged China's membership in WTO. USA had a great amount of trade with China. Even a lot of American companies started investing in China. China became the manufacturing base of the world. And all of this has been encouraged by American liberal policy, which has facilitated the rise of China. And he says that America should have realized that they should not assist the rise of a potential rival. America should have followed a policy of balancing the rise of China instead of assisting its rise. And that is what has now happened. Now USA has realized that, in fact, when Donald Trump was the president, then we saw that an apparent anti-China stand was developed, a policy to counter the rise of China was developed, which has now been continued by Joe Biden presidency also. So this is the viewpoint of offensive neorealism given by John Mearsheimer, which can help us understand the present rivalry which is going on between USA and China. So this is our discussion on offensive and defensive neorealism. I hope the discussion has been beneficial and you've been able to understand the differences between the viewpoints of Kenneth Waltz and John Mearsheimer and what is their understanding of international politics. Even though there are many other theories in IR who would criticize and challenge these claims. For example, liberalism, constructivism, Marxism. But the time doesn't allow that I'll be able to discuss all those criticisms. But I look forward to see all of you in my classroom and where we will discuss other theories also, and we'll discuss what are the problems or limitations of the theory of neorealism as argued by other theories in IR. So I hope the video has been beneficial. Thank you so much, students. Hope to see you soon. Thank you, everybody. All the best for your future. Thank you.